The story of my family and my place within it begins long before that Christmas dinner, before the magazine, before the billions, before any of it. It begins in a suburban house in Ohio, in a neighborhood where success had a very specific definition, and that definition did not include me. I was 8 years old when I first understood that Bethany could do no wrong. The math test came home on a Tuesday afternoon, clutched in her hand like a trophy, and even though it was just a C+, the kind of grade that would have earned me a disappointed sigh and a lecture about working harder, for Bethany it warranted a ceremony. Mom framed it. Actually framed it, in a little wooden rectangle that she hung in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, right next to the family photos. "You tried so hard, sweetheart," she said, and her voice was thick with pride, with the particular kind of maternal tenderness that said, "This matters, you matter, I see you." I stood there watching, clutching my own report card in my small fist. Straight A's, every single class, plus a note from Mrs. Henderson about my science project winning the district competition. I'd built a working model of the solar system that actually rotated, the planets moving in their proper orbits, and the other kids had gathered around my display board like I'd performed magic. I thought maybe this would be the moment. Maybe this would be when they finally saw me. Dad glanced at my report card for exactly 3 seconds. "Good," he said, already turning back to his newspaper. "Now go set the table." And just like that, the moment passed. I walked to the kitchen, my feet dragging against the carpet, and I pulled the plates from the cabinet one by one. Through the doorway, I could hear Mom and Dad talking to Bethany about her math test, about how proud they were, about how she was working so hard and it was really showing. No one mentioned the solar system. No one mentioned the district competition. No one mentioned me. A pattern established itself early and never wavered. Bethany was 3 years older than me, and she occupied the space in our family like a sun around which everyone else orbited. She was confident in that effortless way that made everything she did seem important, beautiful in that classic, conventional sense that made strangers stop and smile at her in grocery stores. She played volleyball and had friends who called the house and laughed loudly at inside jokes. I was the quiet one, the strange one. The one who spent hours in my room reading books that other kids didn't even know existed. At 10 years old, I was studying logistics models, fascinated by the way products moved from factories to warehouses to stores. I didn't know why it captivated me so much, only that it did, that there was something beautiful about efficiency, about systems, about finding the elegant solution to complex problems. At 12, I taught myself basic coding from library books, because the computers at school were too slow to run the programs I wanted to write. I spent my allowance on business magazines that I read cover to cover, memorizing the names of CEOs and the structures of their companies, fascinated by how people built something from nothing. "Morgan's in her room again," Mom would say, and her tone made it clear that this was a character flaw, something that needed to be corrected. "Bethy's at volleyball practice with actual friends." The word actual stung in ways I couldn't articulate, as if my interests weren't real, as if my hours of reading and learning and dreaming were somehow less valuable than hitting a ball over a net, as if the world I was building in my mind was imaginary, while Bethany's world, the one our parents understood and approved of, was the only one that mattered. By 15, I'd started my first business. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make headlines, but it was mine. I'd noticed that vintage jewelry sold for pennies at estate sales and thrift stores, while similar pieces commanded high prices on early internet marketplaces. So I started buying and selling. I used my allowance to purchase pieces, photographed them carefully on a velvet cloth I'd bought at a fabric store, wrote detailed descriptions, and listed them online. I tracked my inventory in a spreadsheet, analyzed which price points generated the most bids, studied the timing of auctions to maximize visibility. In 6 months, I made $3,200. For a 15-year-old in the early 2000s, that felt like a fortune. I was so proud. I remember the afternoon I printed out my bank statement, the numbers crisp and clear on the page, and walked into the living room where Dad sat reading the Sunday paper. "Dad," I said, and my voice trembled slightly with excitement, "I made over $3,000 from my business." He barely looked up. The newspaper stayed raised, a wall between us. "Internet money isn't real money, Morgan," he said, his tone dismissive, already bored with the conversation. When you get a real job at a real company, then we'll talk about success. I stood there for a moment, the bank statement growing warm in my hand before slowly walking back to my room. I didn't cry. I'd learned by then that crying didn't change anything. But I remember lying on my bed that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it would take. What would it take for them to see me? Bethany was 17 then, already dating the son of Dad's business partner. Trevor was handsome in that clean-cut, country club way, with a smile that charmed parents and a future that everyone approved of. "That's cute," Bethany said when she heard about my business. She wasn't mean about it. She was never mean, not really. But her tone carried that particular kind of dismissal that somehow hurt worse than cruelty. It was the sound of someone who pitied you without even realizing it. "Like a lemonade stand," she added, "but online." And then she was gone, off to another party, another event, another moment that mattered to everyone in our family except me. After that, I stopped showing them anything. I stopped sharing my accomplishments, my ideas, my excitement. I learned to keep my world separate, protected, my own private universe where my work had value even if no one else could see it. That decision saved me in ways I wouldn't fully understand for years. College offered an escape, though not in the way my parents intended. They expected me to follow Bethany's path, join a sorority, meet the right kind of people, find a husband who would take care of me while I worked some respectable but unremarkable job. Instead, I majored in business administration and spent every free moment building my second company. This one was more ambitious than jewelry. Drop shipping, focused on sustainable home goods. I'd noticed a gap in the market. Eco-friendly products existed, but they were either wildly expensive or cheaply made, with no middle ground. I found suppliers who could produce quality items at reasonable prices, built a simple website, and started marketing to a niche audience that was hungry for what I was selling. I worked constantly. From 6 in the morning until midnight most days, juggling classes and customer service and supplier negotiations. My roommate thought I was insane. "When do you sleep?" she'd ask, and I'd shrug, because sleep felt less important than building, than growing, than creating something that worked. In the first year, I made $47,000. By year 2, I'd hit $180,000 in revenue. I was 19 and 20 years old, and I was running a business that generated more income than most of my professors would ever see. I didn't tell my parents. Not because I was hiding it exactly, but because I knew how the conversation would go. I knew the script by heart. Meanwhile, Bethany graduated with a communications degree and immediately got hired at Dad's investment firm. Not because she'd applied, because Dad created a position for her. "Director of Client Relations," Mom announced at Sunday dinner, beaming like Bethany had just won a Nobel Prize. $65,000 a year to start. Can you believe it? I was sitting right there. My business had just cleared $200,000 in annual revenue. I was 21 years old. Nobody asked me anything. Nobody even looked in my direction. The conversation moved on to Bethany's office, her colleagues, her commute, her plans for her first paycheck. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, and wondered, not for the first time, whether I was invisible, whether I would always be invisible. At 23, I sold that second business for $1.2 million. The acquisition happened quietly, through a broker who specialized in e-commerce businesses. The buyer was a larger company looking to expand into the sustainable products space, and they offered me a price that made my jaw drop. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at the offer letter, doing the math over and over again because I couldn't believe it was real. $1.2 million, more money than my parents had made in their entire lives combined. And I thought, this is it. This is the moment I finally tell them. This is when they'll understand. But then I imagined the conversation. I imagined Dad's raised eyebrow, Mom's confused expression, the inevitable questions about whether this was real money or just another phase. I imagined the disappointment I'd feel when they failed, yet again, to see me. And I made a different choice. I took the money and I built something bigger. I'd identified a massive gap in the market during my years of running online businesses. Small businesses, retailers, restaurants, service providers, needed better inventory management. The existing solutions were either enterprise-level software that cost $50,000 a year or required a computer science degree to operate, or they were so basic that they couldn't scale. There was nothing in between. Nothing for the business that was too big for spreadsheets but too small for SAP. So I built it. Inventory flow. I took that $1.2 million and I hired a small development team, though I wrote the first version of the code myself. Simple interface. Powerful backend. Subscription model at $79 a month that could scale to $299 for larger operations. I poured everything I had into it. The knowledge I'd gained from my logistics obsession as a child, the practical experience from running my own businesses, the countless hours I'd spent understanding what small business owners actually needed versus what software companies thought they wanted. The first year, we had 340 clients. I remember refreshing our dashboard constantly, watching the numbers climb, feeling a thrill every time a new business signed up. Year 2 brought 1,800 clients. Year 3, 18,000. By year 5, we had 94,000 active subscribers across 47 countries. I'd brought on a development team, a sales director, customer success managers. We'd raised zero outside capital. I owned 100% of the company. The business was valued at $340 million. I personally took home $15 million per year in distributions after reinvestment and salaries. I was 29 years old, and my parents still thought I played store on the internet. I'd learned to keep my answers vague. "How's work?" they'd ask at obligatory family dinners, the question thrown at me like an afterthought between courses. "Fine, busy. Still doing that online thing?" "Yes." They'd nod, already bored, already turning to Bethany. "Tell us about the Henderson account." Bethany had recently made junior partner at Dad's firm. She'd bought a BMW. She'd gotten engaged to Trevor, who worked in medical device sales and wore expensive suits that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Their wedding was set for June at the country club. $85,000 budget, fully funded by our parents. When I'd gotten quietly married to James 2 years earlier, a simple ceremony at a vineyard we'd rented for the weekend, I hadn't even told them until 3 weeks later. "You got married." Mom's voice on the phone was flat, stripped of emotion. "To that programmer you were seeing." "Software architect," I corrected quietly. "Yes, well, I suppose congratulations are in order." She sounded like I'd told her I'd bought new dish towels. No excitement, no joy, just the flat acknowledgement of another life event that didn't fit her vision for me. James was perfect for me, calm, brilliant, understood the business because he'd built his own successful cybersecurity consulting firm. His company revenue was around $8 million annually. Combined, we were doing exceptionally well, though no one in my family knew that. My parents had met him twice. Both times, Dad had asked him if he'd ever considered a real corporate position. Both times, James had smiled politely and changed the subject. The invitation to Christmas dinner came via group text. "Mom, family dinner December 24th, 6 p.m. Bethany and Trevor have big announcement." Bethany, "Can't wait for everyone to celebrate with us. Party popper, Dad. Proud moment for the family." I typed back, "I'll be there." Nobody responded, not even an acknowledgement that I'd seen the message. That was normal. I was the audience for Bethany's life, not a participant in my own. When James and I arrived at my childhood home on Christmas Eve, Bethany's BMW was already in the driveway alongside Trevor's Lexus. My Tesla, which I'd bought without fanfare 2 years ago for $85,000, looked almost too understated next to their vehicles. I remember sitting in the car for a moment, gathering myself. "You ready?" James asked, his hand on mine. "As I'll ever be. You know you don't have to do this." We could be home, drinking hot chocolate and watching terrible Christmas movies. I smiled. "I know, but they're still my family, and I keep hopping." I stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. "You keep hopping, they'll see you." "Yeah, stupid, right?" "Not stupid, just optimistic." I squeezed his hand and got out of the car. Inside, the house smelled like Mom's signature prime rib. The dining room table was set with the good china. Bethany and Trevor were already seated, both holding champagne flutes, their faces bright with excitement and the glow of impending announcement. "Morgan!" Bethany stood to hug me, and it was warm, genuine. We weren't enemies, had never been enemies. She'd never been cruel on purpose. She just never looked past what our parents had decided about me. "You look good. James, good to see you." Dad shook James's hand with that firm grip he used to establish dominance. "Still doing the computer security thing?" "Yes, sir," James said evenly. Business is strong. Good, good. Dad had already lost interest. Bethany, show them the projections you put together for the Whitmore account. We sat. Mom brought out appetizers, brie and crackers, shrimp cocktail, things I remembered from every holiday dinner growing up. The same menu, the same plates, the same dynamics playing out like a play we'd all memorized decades ago. So, Dad said once we'd all been served drinks, your mother and I have some announcements tonight, and so do Bethany and Trevor. Bethany was glowing. We're pregnant. She put her hand on Trevor's. 12 weeks, due in June. Mom actually had tears in her eyes. Our first grandchild. I smiled, and I meant it. Congratulations, that's wonderful. It was wonderful. Bethany would be a good mother. She had that warmth, that capacity for love that our parents had somehow only directed toward her. Dad continued, we've decided to make Bethany full partner at the firm, youngest partner in company history. She's earned it. Trevor raised his glass. To my brilliant wife. Everyone clinked glasses. James and I joined in. And then Dad turned to me almost as an afterthought. Still playing store on the internet, Morgan? He laughed. Not meanly, just dismissively, like he was asking if I still collected stamps. Mom sighed, that particular sigh. Seriously, Morgan, when are you going to get a real job? You're 31 years old. Bethy's building a career, starting a family. You're still doing whatever it is you do all day. I set down my fork. I'm happy with my work. But what is it exactly? Trevor asked, genuinely curious. Like, do you sell things? Is it like Amazon? It's software, I said simply. Business management software. Dad made a dismissive sound. Tech bubble stuff. Remember the dot-com crash? That's going to happen again. Real wealth is in real businesses, asset management, real estate, tangible value. And that's when Bethany picked up the Fortune magazine she'd brought in from the living room. She'd mentioned earlier that she'd grabbed it to read during downtime, a habit she'd had since college. I was reading this earlier, she said, flipping through the pages. They have this feature about entrepreneurs under 40 who, she stopped. Her face drained of color. Trevor touched her arm. You okay? She was staring at the magazine. Her hands started trembling. Oh my God, she whispered, then louder. Oh my God. What they didn't know, what I'd never told them, was that inventory flow had exploded in the past 18 months. We'd been approached by 3 major venture capital firms offering to buy minority stakes at a $1.8 billion valuation. I'd turned them all down. Then, a Fortune 500 logistics company had offered to acquire us for $4.2 billion in cash and stock. I'd accepted. The deal had closed 8 weeks ago. My payout, after taxes and setting aside funds for my team's bonuses, was $2.8 billion. I'd kept the same team, stayed on as CEO for a 3-year transition period at a $15 million annual salary, and maintained creative control over product development. The acquisition had been featured in TechCrunch, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. Forbes had done a profile, and 3 weeks ago, Fortune had named me Entrepreneur of the Year for the under 40 category. The magazine issue had come out 2 days ago. James knew this moment was coming. We discussed it in the car on the way over. They're going to find out eventually, he'd said. I know. You don't owe them a dramatic reveal. I know that too. But here we were. Entrepreneur of the Year, Bethany read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. How she built a $4.2 billion empire. She turned the magazine around. The cover photo was clear, professional, unmistakably me. Dad's fork clattered to his plate. Mom's hand went to her throat. Trevor leaned forward. Is that? Bethany's voice cracked. This is you. You sold your company for $4.2 billion. I took a sip of water. The article is well researched. Dad stood up from the table. You sold a business for billion with a B, I said calmly. The acquisition closed in October. It was in the Wall Street Journal. Mom's face had gone completely pale. You're the Morgan Chin in this article, CEO of Inventory Flow, the revolutionary inventory management platform. Yes. Bethany was reading frantically now, her eyes scanning the text faster and faster. Chin started the company 6 years ago with 0 outside funding, building it into a juggernaut with 94,000 active subscribers across 47 countries. Her personal stake in the $4.2 billion acquisition, $8 billion. The room went completely silent. James quietly reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. Trevor broke the silence. $2.8 billion, before taxes. After taxes, I corrected. Dad sat back down heavily. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at him evenly. You never asked. And there it was, the truth I'd been carrying for years, finally spoken aloud in the middle of my childhood dining room. Every time you asked about my work, you called it playing store on the internet or asked when I get a real job. Mom's voice was faint. We thought it was just a hobby. It employed 53 people, I said, all of whom became millionaires when the deal closed. I structured the sale to prioritize their financial security. Bethany was still reading. Chin is known in Silicon Valley for her unconventional approach. No venture capital, no flashy spending, no press coverage until the acquisition was announced. She built her empire while working from a modest 3,200 square foot office and driving a 2020 Tesla. She looked up at me. You've been a billionaire for 2 months and you didn't say anything. Would you have believed me if I just told you? No one answered. Dad's face had gone from pale to red. This doesn't make sense. How could you? I'm in finance. I understand business. If you'd built something worth billions, we would have known. You would have known if you'd asked, I said quietly. Or if you'd read TechCrunch or Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or Forbes. The Forbes profile came out in September. Mom's hands were trembling. Morgan, who we didn't know. I'm aware. Trevor was still processing. So when we were talking about Bethy's salary at the firm, you were making what exactly? My salary was $8 million annually before the acquisition, I said. Now it's $15 million for the next 3 years as part of the transition agreement. Dad's champagne glass slipped from his hand. It shattered on the hardwood floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. Bethany set the magazine down carefully, like it might explode. The article says you funded a scholarship program for women in STEM. $50 million. $52 million, I corrected. It's administered through MIT and Stanford. We received 8,400 applications in the first cycle. Mom started crying, not graceful tears, actual sobbing. Why didn't you tell us? Why would you let us think? Think what? I asked, my voice still calm. That I was wasting my time, that I needed to get a real job, that Bethany was the successful one. That's not fair, Bethany said, but her voice was uncertain. Isn't it? I looked at her. You're a junior partner making $180,000 a year at Dad's firm. That's genuinely impressive. I'm proud of you. But at Christmas dinner 2 years ago, Dad spent 40 minutes explaining your promotion to everyone. When I mentioned I'd hired our 20th employee, he asked if I was finally going to become profitable. We didn't know, Dad said, but his voice had no strength behind it. No, I agreed. You didn't because you never asked. James spoke for the first time since the magazine appeared. The article mentions that Morgan's parents were unaware of her success until the acquisition was announced. The journalist asked Morgan about that. Do you want to know what she said? Everyone stared at him. She said, I built my business for myself, not for external validation. The people who needed to know, my team, my clients, my husband, they knew. That was enough. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Mom's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it reflexively. Her face went even paler if that was possible. It's Catherine Henderson, she whispered. Catherine was one of Mom's closest friends from their country club circle. She's texting about she's asking if the Morgan Chin in Fortune magazine is my daughter. Bethany's phone started buzzing too, then Trevor's, then Dad's. It's going viral, Trevor said, scrolling through his phone. There's a LinkedIn post with 40,000 likes. This is what real entrepreneurship looks like, building value quietly while everyone doubts you. Dad's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It's Richard Whitmore, one of his major clients. He answered. Richard, hello. We could hear Richard's booming voice through the phone. Jim just saw the Fortune article. Your daughter, the Morgan Chin. Why didn't you tell me your daughter built Inventory Flow? We've been using their software for 3 years. Game changer for our operations. Dad's face cycled through several emotions. Yes, we're very proud. Proud? Jim, you should have been shouting it from the rooftops. I'm telling everyone at the club tomorrow. We need to do lunch. I want to pick your brain about the industry. Must run in the family, that business sense. Dad hung up slowly. He wants to have lunch, he said flatly. To talk about business sense that runs in the family. The immediate consequences began within hours. Mom's phone didn't stop ringing. Every friend, every country club acquaintance, every distant relative, all calling to congratulate her on having such a successful daughter. I don't know what to tell them, Mom said, still crying. Everyone's asking why we didn't mention it. Another call. Another voice. Nancy Pritchard said she read the article and it mentioned we didn't know. She asked if we were estranged. Are we? She asked, and her voice cracked on the question. I didn't answer. Dad's phone was worse. Business contacts, golf buddies, everyone. And beneath the congratulations was a question they didn't ask but clearly wondered. How did you not know? Bethany was sitting very still. Trevor, she said quietly, we should go. Bait, I said. She looked at me. Congratulations on the baby. Genuinely, that's wonderful news. Her eyes filled with tears. Morgan, I didn't know. I swear if I'd known. I know, I said. And I did. Bethany had never been deliberately cruel. She just never questioned the family narrative. They left 20 minutes later. James and I stayed, mostly because we wanted to make clear that this wasn't a dramatic exit. This was just the truth finally visible. Dad sat at the table, the Fortune magazine open in front of him. The article mentions you started this when you were 23. Yes, we thought I told you it was a phase. You did. My voice was gentle. Morgan, his voice cracked. Why didn't you tell us? I considered my answer carefully. At first, because I wanted to prove I could do it, then because you'd made it clear you weren't interested. By the time it became something worth mentioning, I'd built a life where your opinion didn't define my success. Mom flinched. That came out harsher than I meant it, I said. But it's true. I built this for me. Not to prove anything to you, not to earn your approval, just because I saw a problem and wanted to solve it. The article says you turned down venture capital, Dad said, still reading. Multiple offers, $1.8 billion valuation. I didn't want to answer to investors. He looked up, that's actually smart business. I know. The escalating consequences came over the next week, and they were, I have to admit, deeply satisfying to watch from a distance. Dad's business partner called him, excited about Bethany's connection to me through the family. We should leverage this. Get Morgan to speak at our investor conference. Dad had to explain that his daughter wasn't taking his calls, because after that Christmas dinner I'd set boundaries. I'd sent a family email, carefully worded. I love you all, but I need time to process the family dynamics that have been in place for most of my life. I'm not angry. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply protecting my peace. When and if I'm ready to rebuild our relationship, I'll reach out. I need you to respect this boundary. Mom had called 17 times the first day. I didn't answer. Dad had shown up at my office. My assistant, following my instructions, had politely told him I was unavailable and offered to schedule a meeting for 4 weeks out. He'd left, shell-shocked. Bethany had sent a long text message. Morgan, I'm so sorry. I never realized. I was so caught up in my own life that I didn't see yours. The baby news. I want you to be part of this. Not because of who you are or what you've accomplished, but because you're my sister. When you're ready, I'm here. I'd sent back. Thank you. I need some time, but I do want to be part of the baby's life. Let's talk in January. The final consequences manifested when the social embarrassment became complete. Dad's golf club friends kept asking about me. One of them had been at a conference where I'd given a keynote speech 3 months ago. Your daughter is brilliant. That speech about sustainable growth strategies, I took 20 pages of notes. Dad hadn't known I gave keynote speeches. Mom's book club had started reading business biographies. Someone brought in a recent biography about female entrepreneurs. Had a chapter. Your daughter is in this, they'd said. Did you know she mentors young women in tech? Mom hadn't known that either. The worst came when Dad's firm landed a major client, a tech company looking to expand. They specifically requested to work with Dad because his daughter revolutionized their industry, and they wanted that family business perspective. In the meeting, the client had asked, So, what's it like having Morgan Chin as a daughter? Do you consult with her on our tech strategy? Dad had to admit he had no contact with me. The client had looked uncomfortable. The deal nearly fell through. I heard about this from a friend who worked at the firm, and I'll admit, I felt a grim satisfaction. Not because I wanted Dad to suffer, but because the consequences were finally real. They couldn't pretend anymore. They couldn't act like their dismissal of me had no cost. The bill had come due, and it was astronomical. 6 weeks after Christmas, I agreed to meet Mom for coffee. She came alone. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older, she'd been crying, I could tell. Thank you for seeing me, she said. I nodded. I've been thinking, she started, then stopped. No, I've been doing more than thinking. Your father and I have been in therapy, individual and couples. That surprised me. Okay. The therapist asked me why I thought Bethany was more successful than you. Mom's voice was steady but pained. I told her all of Bethy's accomplishments. The therapist asked what you'd accomplished. I realized I couldn't answer, not because you hadn't accomplished anything, but because I'd never asked. I sipped my coffee. Morgan, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to suddenly want family dinners again, but I need you to know that I see it now. How we treated you, how we dismissed everything you worked for, how we made you feel invisible in your own family. I appreciate that, I said quietly. The Fortune article mentioned your scholarship fund, $52 million. When I read that, Mom's voice caught. Morgan, that's more than our house is worth, more than your father's made in his entire career, and you just gave it away. It's money that can change lives, women who wouldn't otherwise have access to education in STEM fields. That felt important. Mom's eyes filled with tears. You're a better person than I taught you to be. I shook my head. You taught me resilience even if you didn't mean to. You taught me to build something for myself, not for external validation. Those aren't bad lessons. But we should have seen you, she whispered. We should have asked, we should have known. Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. We sat in silence for a moment. What happens now? Mom asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not cutting you out of my life, but I'm also not pretending the past didn't happen. I've built a life I'm proud of with people who see me clearly. James, my team, my chosen family, that's my foundation. You and Dad and Bethany, you can be part of my life, but you're not the center of it anymore. She nodded slowly. That's fair. Bethany texted me the next week. She was having a girl. She wanted to name her Morgan, middle name. That caught me off guard. That's unexpected, I told Mom when she shared the news. She said she wants her daughter to grow up knowing that success isn't loud, Mom said, managing a small smile. That the most powerful people in the room are often the quietest. She said she wants her daughter to be like you. I felt something crack in my chest, just a little. I'd like to be part of that, I said quietly. The baby's life on my terms. Whatever terms you need, Mom said immediately. Morgan, we're going to do better. I know that sounds empty right now, but we're trying. I believed her. Not because I thought everything would magically fix itself, but because I could see she meant it. 2 weeks later, I had dinner with Bethany. She was showing now, glowing with pregnancy hormones and nervous energy. I'm really sorry, she said for the 50th time. I know you've said that, but I mean it. I know that too, she twisted her napkin. I keep thinking about all the times I didn't ask about your work, all the times I just assumed you were doing okay, nothing special. I was so wrapped up in my own world. You were living your life, that's normal. But you're my sister. I am, I agreed. And you're going to be a mom, that's incredible, Bate. She smiled, tears in her eyes. I really do want you to be part of this, Aunt Morgan. Not because you're famous now, but because you're my sister and I'm really proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago. You're saying it now, I said. That counts. 3 months later, I attended my niece's baby shower. Dad was there, quieter than usual, watching me with something like wonder. Mom was attentive without being overbearing. Bethany introduced me to her friends without mentioning fortune or money or business. Just, this is my sister, Morgan. It felt like a beginning, not a reset. You can't erase 31 years of family dynamics, but a beginning. I left the shower early. I had a board meeting the next morning, and James and I drove home through the evening traffic. That was good, he said. It was, I agreed. Think it'll stick, the changes? I don't know, but I'm not waiting around to find out. I've got a life to live, he smiled. Billionaire CEO by day, auntie by weekend. Something like that. My phone buzzed, a text from Bethany. Thank you for coming, it meant everything. I texted back. Wouldn't have missed it, love you. And I meant it. Because here's what I'd learned. Success wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about the moment they finally saw you. It was about building something meaningful while no one was watching. And then, when they finally noticed, being secure enough in yourself that their validation, or lack thereof, didn't define you. I'd built a $4.2 billion empire in the quiet spaces of my life, while my family focused elsewhere. The revelation hadn't changed who I was. It had just forced them to see what had always been there. And now, driving home with my husband, with a niece on the way and a company I loved, still innovating, still growing, I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I had something better. I had myself. And that, my friends, is what I call the perfect revenge, not through cruelty or manipulation, but simply through quiet, persistent success. The kind that can't be denied when it's finally revealed. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? What would you do if you could prove them all wrong? And of course, subscribe for more stories like this, hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and remember, Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is building something magnificent in the silence and letting the truth speak for itself. Until next time.